Hey guys, it has been way too long since my last Steel Aces video, so it is time for an update. The game has come a long way since. I have the founder and lead developer along with me to show you guys some of the most recent changes. Also the progress of the latest version of the Ballistics model. This is still something that's being constructed, but I think you're going to find it very interesting. I'm going to keep this part short because I too would like to get straight to the video. But some news since the last major update besides all the progress in-game is that Steel Aces actually had its first public showcase. We went ahead and brought versions of the game to show the public at the open house at the National Armored Cavalry Collection down at Fort Moore. So a couple thousand people came through to play the first version, and it is that version that I have for this video showcase today. Because it's the public display version, we didn't have a hygienic way to do sound because of the headphone sharing and everything, so we actually just made this version without any sound. So in this video, the version that's on display that we're walking you through does not have any game sounds, and it's intentional. Those are definitely still being built, but for this version we don't have it. So I thought I would bring that up so that you have an idea of kind of the progress. The UI is also under construction. You guys know this is a game being developed, so just keep in mind that a lot of things are still subject to changes. This is not the final product, and if you're like, man, this doesn't look so good, it's because we're still working on it. Let's go.
Yeah, so right now this isn't actually all the vehicles we have, but we have a few brand new vehicles in the game. I think the T-29 is a pretty interesting one because it was actually present at the Cavalry Collection event. Was literally like 30 yards away. So was pretty cool to see that thing in real life and in the game next to each other. I think the model actually lines up pretty well. Another noteworthy vehicle that we have is a Leopard 2A4. So this is the most modern vehicle that we have in exquisite detail, I dare say, and modeled to the best standards that we could get. As you can see, we also model these anti-slip pads, so they're rough, so you don't slip off and break your neck. And of course, the vehicle has a few tricks up its sleeve. In this case, you can see that the regular steel armor is colored in blue, like you can see the engine deck back here. And all of the composite armor is colored in red. Right now, I mean, this is just preliminary. This is a simple preview. We'll work on this to make it look a bit nicer. But as you can see, there's a lot more than what meets the eye here. And I think another noteworthy vehicle would be the MX-1375. This is also a brand new vehicle.
This is great.
Some really nice detail. I really like these cleaning tools back here, to be honest. They look really, really good. And getting some beauty shots in here.
Yeah, it looked great. I was so impressed when I saw this version for the first time. We were all super busy, and so when we set up our booth and everything, we had it up on the big screen. It looked really good.
Yeah. And we also have a BMD2, which is actually the first modern vehicle with an autocannon.
Oh,
so,
look at him. He's cute.
Yes, it actually has I guess chain gun would be the correct term. And it also has an anti-tank guided missile. So technically speaking, this is also the first vehicle with multiple turrets, because essentially the ATGM launcher works like a secondary turret, so it can rotate independently from the main turret. So you can also control these independently, and we can showcase that in a bit.
Awesome. The other thing that I thought was great, and we made this version just for demonstration, right? So there was kind of a test range map. Let's take one of these vehicles out on our range, and let's talk a little bit about your guys' plans for maps.
Generally speaking, when it comes to the maps, it's a huge topic. I think specifically with World of Tanks and War Thunder, they both receive a significant amount of criticism for the map design and how the maps play out. Surely the game design and how vehicle balancing currently works in those games, or doesn't work, plays a significant role in how the maps play. For instance,
Absolutely.
I think that, like we all know mines in World of Tanks, right? Mines, I think, is actually a competent map for low-tier vehicles.
Sure.
Perfectly fine. It's very simple, right? You just drive up the hill more or less, right? And it just falls very short when you actually have vehicles that have significant view range and much more mobility. So that is just something that is not accounted for. Same with the entire spawn camping situation in War Thunder, right? Like with high-tier vehicles, you can basically just race 50 meters forward, switch on your thermals, and then you just spawn kill someone in the other spawn. And that's just something that needs to be addressed, right? And the general concepts that we have for map design are that you can't make every map work for every vehicle or every historical period, right?
Right.
So we will have maps that are only available to World War II era vehicles, and we will have maps that are exclusively available for modern vehicles. Simply because modern vehicles are much more mobile, and there's no point in making a vehicle that can move at 60, 70 kilometers an hour play on a map that's like 1,000 meters or something, right?
Yeah.
It's just too small, and it's bad for the game. Aside from that, I have the philosophy that basically it's fine that some maps are harder to play for some vehicles than for others. That is perfectly fine.
Because that's life, you know what I mean?
Yes, like life can be hard, and life can be a bit unfair at times, right? But the point is that every vehicle should have a fighting chance on every map, right? And especially if we look at World of Tanks at the moment, with the meta being heavy tanks going faster and faster and essentially moving medium tanks completely out of their space. Like a T-125 is basically as fast as a medium tank when it uses a turbo. It just has more armor, more HP, and a better gun. There's basically no point in playing a medium tank anymore, and we don't have this classical divide between light tank, medium tank, heavy tank positions anymore. All the meta vehicles just play the same positions because they're fast enough to go there, and then it's really just about armor, DPM, and gun handling, and I guess gold spam. But there's just no nuance to it anymore, and that is something we want to address by having more options available for the players, like tactics-wise.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, and this is one of those things that obviously just takes time, and it also takes testing. So it's not something that you can say outright like, this is what it's going to be, because we have to shake it
Yes.
up. But I think the intention of that identifies kind of the issues from other games is really important. So on this one, I thought could you get in the grass and show the gun effects? I think it looks fire.
Yes.
Yeah, like, it looks good.
And
That's just my I dig it. But I think one of the questions that I got is like, are you gonna have player contests for maps?
Yes. So in fact, and I'm gonna say this here publicly for the first time, I think, we actually we plan on featuring a map creation tool, which would allow people from the community to actually build maps.
Oh, that's sick.
And then people can just vote for maps they find interesting, right? And maybe a map that is voted for isn't quite finished, right? Maybe it's in a rough state, something like that. We can always take that and refine the concept.
Yeah.
And I think that just more brains bring more good ideas, right? Like as primitive as it sounds.
Sure.
And that's really the approach we want to take here. We're just taking this chance. As you can see, we added some impact decals. So when you penetrate the target, now you get like a nice impact mark that is scaled to the caliber of the projectile.
Nice.
Obviously being a 75 for the MX-13. As you can see, we have a 6-round autoloader here. Strictly speaking, the MX-13 has more rounds available than that. This is more of a balancing issue, right? If essentially you give the vehicle the amount of rounds it could have in real life, well, I'm not taking into account that a combat load actually has high explosive rounds mostly, right? But if we gave this thing like 13 rounds, right, then how do you balance that? Do you give it like 13 rounds with 3 seconds of reload time? Because then it's completely broken and it can destroy everything? Or what do we do, right? And I think the point of autoloaders, as people expect, is to just have a fun vehicle that is bursty and that has a trade-off, right? Like
Sure.
you get a lot of damage quickly, but you have to account for the fact what happens when I'm out of ammo, right?
Right.
We've taken a similar approach to World of Tanks in this case, right? Simply because it's the most agreeable at the moment.
Because not everything, it is still a game, and it has to be fun, and
Yes.
sometimes having everything entirely exactly the way that it is to real life is not fun. It's not going to be balanced, and at the end of the day, I think I really look forward to the PvE mode for that example, because it will be easier to balance stuff.
Specifically with historical scenarios, I'd say that balancing is not as important because historical scenarios will mostly feature players and bots, right?
Yeah, right.
So, and a bot cannot get upset about something being unfair.
Exactly.
So, we can make things as, in quotation marks, unfair or as realistic as we want, right? There's no balance that we could break. And for PvP, people want and need to be treated fairly. So obviously there's a few concessions we have to make when it comes to gameplay. Because sure, like, would it be realistic that you could get a sudden engine breakdown or something, or a carburetor backfire and your Panther lights on fire? Sure, that could happen, but like,
yes.
what does it actually add to the game? It's like, boom, you're dead. So what did you do wrong? Nothing. You just got unlucky.
Yeah, and
There's
I
just
think
no
that
real point in adding that to the game.
the element of I know how to do this and I'm going to do it, but I got unlucky and lost to something that was inferior to me is an element of, let's say, World of Tanks that I think frustrates a large part of the Western player base. Like, I know how to do this. Like, I'm, in the 99th percentile of players, and I properly applied my knowledge and I have the correct reaction time and I aimed it where I was supposed to aim. But something random happened and screwed me over is, I think, a large element of the dissatisfaction for the player experience.
Yeah.
So something that's like we're going to the tank range versus we're going to the casino. I think it's a big difference in terms of the intention for the player experience. But can we talk a little bit about what you guys have in store for the physics behind your ballistics in this game?
Yes. So generally speaking, there's a few more things I've planned and a bunch of features that will be implemented as soon as I get around to it. But the general idea is that I want a bit more nuance in the engagement ranges in the game, right? Because World of Tanks, basically, range doesn't matter. It's more about accuracy than actual perforation of the projectiles. I don't think you can remember a single time where in World of Tanks we're like, oh yeah, I can't penetrate that guy at this range, I have to get closer, right?
Right.
It's basically non-existent, also because of the gigantic RNG factor.
Yes.
And in order to give a bit more nuance to that, we do a couple things. The first one is there is 0 RNG on penetration, so it's always consistent. For instance, if you take a look at this stat card that I just pulled up, it's also work in progress. It's just how it looks at the moment. It just says perforation 65. There is no plus minus 25%. There is no range. It is 65, full stop, at 0 meters, and it will 100% be the exact same every single time. In fact, you actually see this blue curve down there, and that shows how this specific projectile uses perforation against angles. Because for us, individual projectiles, as in real life, perform differently against angles. World of Tanks has the assumption that every single projectile behaves the same way against angles, essentially. The only word I could use to describe their ballistics model is primitive, and I'm not being malicious here, it's just a statement of fact, right? They don't take into account that a projectile can actually get deviated while punching through an armor plate. They tend to ride along the armor plate at a certain point. And for World of Tanks, they just assume it goes straight through all the time, which makes angled armor much worse than it actually is. And that is something that we do, right? So as you can see, at a 60-degree angle, the perforation power has actually dropped off to less than 50% in this case. Whereas if you took the normal approach of assuming the projectile just goes through half the way, cosine of 60 is 0.5. So that would mean that 65 perforation should drop down to 32. But in this case, it's something like 28, 26. So that is exactly that effect of the projectile being diverted within the armor plate.
I think
nothing.
Like you mentioned, primitive is not a malicious word. That system is very playable. You know what I mean? It's okay. It's okay to have something simple, but this reflecting the real life physics of how a round interacts with armor, I think it adds like a depth of complexity that is very rewarding when you learn it, right? Like when you understand it.
Intention.
Yeah. Like I think that's really cool. And this is something, so you can see that profile for your rounds. That's something that's available to the player, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
and in fact, if you look at this, it actually updates the range. So if you aim at longer ranges, like especially here when we're aiming at the horizon, it's locked at 1,000 meters at the moment, you actually see the performance drop quite a bit, right? And that's just to help the player estimate range, but players always have to estimate the angle by themselves.
Sure.
So that's something they have to learn. We also go ahead and scale ballistics losses up internally. Right now, of course, that's still a bit of a balancing thing. How much do we do that? But the general idea is any range that you have here in the game for guns larger than like 35 millimeters is basically point blank in tank combat terms, right? So like 600 meters, like a Leopard or Abrams gunner is probably not even going to lace the target. They'll just pull the trigger, right? There's no point, because at that range you have no actual drop of the projectile. It's basically just a flat trajectory. And the same for perforation losses, right? It'd basically be like shooting a target at 0 meters. There is almost no performance difference. And that's why we scale the performance losses up internally in order to create a better feel of range. So shooting a target at 400 meters is actually different than shooting it at 200. So you will get cases where you're like, oh, well, I can't actually go through that guy at that range. I have to get closer.
Nice.
As you can see here, by the way, you can actually ricochet projectiles off.
Yes.
So when you shoot the upper plate here, it ricochets and it still goes through.
That's cool.
It has barely enough to go through. So yeah, any more questions about that?
Well, I think what you mentioned, like, you can see that profile in game. You don't have to go to a third-party website. There's no like hidden there's no hidden like techniques of the game that you have to find out about from something else to go find out. It's like, what's this? And then, you know, have to go to another website to kind of figure it out. There's no like hidden knowledge, which is nice, I think, so that players can understand if they are failing to penetrate, they can see why, you know. Is there gonna, my question is, and I think like a lot of people have just asked me this, but is there gonna be like a mode like this where you can have a test range for vehicles in game?
I think that's just cool, because quite often we have people who play one of these tank games because like, I want to drive an Abrams, right? And I think just having the opportunity to actually try out a vehicle just helps people a bit in finding out what they might want to play later on, right? I don't really see a point in like gatekeeping the cool stuff away from people. I think it's a good form of motivation, actually.
Sure. Yeah, that'll be cool.
Also,
oh, there we go. That was cool.
This is the guided missile.
Yeah,
so like a different impact mark, as you can see here, like with the heat impact round and the splatters around. And the tube is actually empty, right? So when you fire it, the tube is empty, and now it's reloaded. Also, if you take a look at this, you can see that the performance is very different. So it actually, first of all, it doesn't change with range, right? Obviously, because it's a missile. And it's basically a perfect cosine shape until it suddenly drops off. And that is basically the angle at which the projectile fails to fuse. That's essentially the warhead being crushed, right? So the angle is so steep that it just crushes the head and it cannot fuse properly.
What are you looking into to build that curve? Are you going to real-world formulas?
Generally speaking, yes. There's a few methods that you can use for different projectile types, right? So for instance, for full caliber AP rounds, there's a few formulas by Jacob Demar. He was a French naval officer, I think. And he has come up with some pretty decent approximations for getting a pretty decent idea of the perforation power of a full caliber AP round. There's a few parameters you can adjust, like mass, velocity, the caliber of the projectile, and then a K mod. It's basically a factor around, it's usually between 1500 and 2500, and it's basically a measure for how efficient is this specific shape of the projectile at perforating armor. So for instance, when you get very sharp-tipped projectiles, like the German 8.8 Panzergranate 39, they generally have pretty high K mods because they're really good at penetrating armor. So that's why they get pretty high perforation power, especially against flat plates. In fact, all full caliber AP rounds in the game are currently based on that. They also have a second important parameter, which is called a slope mod. And the general idea behind that is, depending on the individual composition of the projectile, that could be hardening of the projectile, that could be having a ballistic cap or not, having a soft metal cap to prevent shattering, lots of stuff like that influences that. But the general idea is that some projectiles are worse at penetrating angled armor and they're more prone to breaking apart or ricocheting. And we can model that through this so-called slope exponent. So
And this is
projectiles are
something
really bad.
that once again is going to be modeled in the game for the player to see. Like, it's not going to be like I said,
Yes.
it's not going to be paywall behind something. You're not going to have premium ammo. So the shells that don't break apart aren't necessarily going to cost more. You can't just buy into an advantage of shell. Understanding the behavior of certain shells in different scenarios against different armors is up to the player. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, there's a lot more nuance in armor. So, for instance, especially early war APCR rounds, they're generally of the arrowhead type. So they in a cross section, they literally look like an arrowhead, right? They have this very pronounced sharp tip, and then a tungsten core in there, and they're pretty decent at punching through flat armor. They have generally really bad aerodynamic characteristics. For instance, there's a German 5 centimeter APCR round that punches through like 135 millimeters of armor, which is ludicrous. And it drops off super hard because the velocity is so high and it has such high drag that it's basically useless beyond like 1,000 meters or something. And we can model that accurately. And for instance, if you have a German tank with a 5 centimeter who has access to that round, you can take that round, but you can't just spam it everywhere because, especially at longer ranges, it's going to perform horribly. Because, yeah, like the base perforation is higher, but at range, that's not the case, right? For instance, we're looking at this one. This is the DM23. That's a 120 APFSTS round for the Leopard 2. As you can see, the curve is a lot more gentle, right? It's like almost circular shaped, right? And that is because APFSTS rounds, so the long rod fins, are extraordinarily good at penetrating angled armor. So to the point that for modern vehicles, it's actually not super relevant how angled the armor is anymore.
Right.
So they don't really care about that. So that's why the perforation doesn't drop off nearly as much.
Thank you guys so much for watching. That's actually the first half of the original recording. The second half is essentially just some sort of, you could classify it as dev Q&A. It's basically just us yapping. So I wanted to leave that for a separate video. I'll go ahead and upload that next. So if you have any other questions about the game in general that came up while watching this, the chances are it might have been answered in the first one, and some updates to those answers will be fleshed out in the second one too. So if you have any questions, drop them down in the comments, but know that we're working on those, and I would also like to do a live dev Q&A later. If you didn't see my announcement and you couldn't figure it out from the language, there's a lot more we instead of they usage, and that is because I am very proud to have signed on as the brand representative for Steel Aces. I'm really proud of this team, and I think this project is going to be awesome. The genre of tank game could use an awful lot more innovation, and I have some more thoughts on that, but I think we'll leave that for the next video. But I'll just go ahead and say I think this game is going to be awesome. As a tank dork, I'm excited. As a gamer, I'm excited. And so if you are also excited, please continue to follow along, ask your questions, give us your criticisms, share it with your friends and sort of fellow tank dorks or fellow tank game players, because I think the market of legally distinct multiplayer online tank games could use another one. So this is going to be awesome. I'm looking forward to sharing the news with you guys here on my own channel, as well as across my pages on social media. So thank you again, and the links for the website for this game, as well as the Steam page where you can follow and put it on your wish list, are down below in the description. And follow along. I will see you for the next video coming very soon. Thank you guys.